Let's do a little thought experiment. Let's pretend there's no election around the corner and that politicians don't have to worry right now about blowback from their opponents or indeed the media. What should be done to put Australia in the best position possible to weather the great global uncertainty we are experiencing? More Trump tariffs are on the way. Exactly what they'll hit and how hard remains unclear. And this comes at a time when the budget in Australia is sinking back into the red. The budget on Tuesday night will show we're back in deficit, with deficits forecast for at least the next 4 years. So how do we put the Australian economy and budget in the best shape possible? And are the ideas being put forward by the two sides of politics ahead of this election actually going to help or hurt our situation? That's what I'm keen to explore here. And for those new to the pod, we are now in the Politics Now feed and very happy to be there. This is where we try to dive a little deeper with an expert rather than a politician to get a better understanding of a policy idea. I'm David Speers on Ngunnawal Country at Parliament House in Canberra. Welcome to Insiders on Background. Danielle Wood has been chair of the Productivity Commission since November of 2023. She was appointed by this government, but has also shown a willingness to be fiercely independent, criticising at times some of Labor's policy ideas. Danielle Wood, welcome. Good to talk to you again.
Thanks for having me, David.
So, look, I thought we'd start with maybe a little bit of an explanation. Sometimes people can hear the word productivity and switch off or get a little terrified of the word. What is productivity? Why does it matter, and how is it tracking at the moment in Australia?
Look, I am so glad you asked that, David, and you're right. Their eyes do glaze over. I don't like saying I'm the Productivity Commissioner at parties. You can imagine the response I get to that. Productivity is simply really how we marshal our resources as a nation, our people, our capital, and try and get better over time at producing goods and services. And productivity matters because it's ultimately what drives our living standards over time. So, why is it that the average Australian today has material living standards that are 4 times higher than the average Australian in the 1950s? It's because we've improved our growth through productivity. So if we care about generation on generation progress in living standards, we should care about productivity.
And how are we going then at the moment? Is it getting better or worse or flatlining?
Look, essentially, it's been a bumpy ride through COVID. On our latest data, which is the year to December 2024, we actually went backwards over the course of the year. So productivity went backwards by 1.2%. So that is not a great result from my perspective, but we do need to remember that the kind of reverberations of that macroeconomic shock are still playing a role in that data. I'm much more interested in the kind of a longer term picture. But that's also not particularly spectacular. If we look at the sort of decade before COVID, we were running at about 1.1% a year on average. During that decade, that was the lowest level in 60 years. The 60-year average, to give you a sense, is about 1.7%. So it has been sluggish. That has flown through to lower growth in wages and living standards. Worth saying we're not alone in that. Almost every developed country in the world faces that challenge, but it doesn't make it any less important.
So what should be done about this? I mean, if we can pretend for a moment there's no election, if we can do this little thought experiment and put politics to one side, what would be a few things you would recommend need to be done to lift productivity in Australia and give us those better living standards?
Look, we are actually currently doing this exact exercise at the Commission, and the government has asked us to essentially give it a productivity agenda.
So you can give us a sneak peek.
Nice try. That we'll be coming out, mid-year with some draft reports there. Right. But let me just give you a very kind of high level idea. Is ultimately it's about making Australia a great place to live, to invest and to do business. So one thing that we have talked about recently is the importance of housing to productivity. It's a big social issue, but it's also a big economic issue. If we don't have places for people to live close to high productivity jobs in our cities, that is a long-term drain on our outcomes. We have looked at this question of how do we build more, and it's a complicated picture, but one key finding is that we have layered on regulation and made it more complex, across local government, state government, federal government. So I think that is, one area where we really should
removing some of that red tape or green tape that's involved in getting housing going.
We have to be able to build again. And, it's critical for housing. It's also critical for things like energy infrastructure. So that is certainly going to be one of the themes that we're thinking about in this report.
All right. But beyond housing, are there things in the tax system or industrial relations that really stand out as, priorities for Australia?
Look, I think those areas frequently come up when we're talking about productivity. And as you know, I've been an advocate for broad-based tax reform. I think, we hear a lot about industrial relations as I go around the economy and talk to business. So there's certainly things that can be on the agenda. But I also always like to stress, because I think we often default to tax and IR, that a productivity agenda is much broader than that. So it is, how do we make sure that our businesses are best placed to adopt new digital technologies? It's, how do we make sure that our care economy is operating as efficiently as it can be? How do we make sure that our education system is delivering workers with the skills we need? So we need to remember that productivity conversation is bigger than tax and IR. All of those things need to come into play.
I guess, look, we're hearing a lot at the moment, rightly, about the global uncertainty that we're facing, wars raging, tariffs being applied by the Trump administration, more of them to come in a week or so. This is a particularly uncertain environment that we're in, and I guess there's some urgency, the debate around, well, what do we do to get ourselves in shape? And we're not alone. I mean, the UK, Canada, other typical US allies and trading partners are facing a similar situation and trying to work out what to do. We are seeing a bit more urgency, I think, in some other countries than here. But what do you think? Do we need more urgency to get ourselves in better shape, better position to weather this global uncertainty?
Well, I think the premise of your question is right. We should be thinking about, what it is that we do. I think it is incredibly unfortunate that, our major ally and friend is introducing these shocks to the global trading system. And Australia, as a medium-sized open economy, has been a huge beneficiary of globalisation and freer trade. So it's unfortunate we're in this position, but we have to think about what we do. Look, I think the government is absolutely right to say that we shouldn't move to retaliate. What we know is that, or certainly what our modelling suggests, and it's consistent with the modelling of Treasury, when the US acts, the kind of first round or direct effects of Australia, whether that's kind of across the board tariffs or new tariffs on China, are pretty small in terms of the impact on our growth rate. Where it ratchets up is when you start talking about retaliation and kind of waves of response and counter response and the broad uncertainty that creates for business. So
don't apply tit for tat tariffs.
Don't apply tit for tat. The worst thing we could do for our consumers and businesses is to do that. And I think the government's making the right noises in that respect.
So what should it do? How should we respond to these tariffs?
I think we should go out and be making the case for free trade. And Australia has been a leader actually over decades in talking about why trade matters, why it improves our living standards, why it's not a zero-sum game. So I think we can play a leadership role on the national stage. And then beyond that, we really have to, as I said before, look to make Australia as strong as we can be, to be looking at what makes Australia a great place to live and invest. Because I think ultimately that's all we can control in this really uncertain time.
One of the things the government's doing, and this predates the return of Donald Trump to the White House, is trying to make us more self-sufficient. This is its Future Made in Australia agenda that it started rolling out in last year's budget. Tax credits for critical minerals and hydrogen. We've seen investments in other things like solar panel making, a quantum computer, and so on. Last year, you were critical of some of these ideas. Has your view softened at all on that, or are you still concerned about this Future Made in Australia approach?
Look, I mean, I think the goal of self-sufficiency in any of those things is not going to be a realistic one in almost any case. So, I don't think that is the response to this current period of uncertainty. I think when the government embedded the national interest framework into the legislation, that was an important development in my mind, because what that did is put a rigorous framework around these types of investments and said, there may be these narrow set of circumstances where there is a case to do this because we are, trying to develop new technologies to respond to climate change, or we think there's national security arguments for interventions, but they are a narrow set of cases and we're going to put some guardrails around it. So that very much was a positive development in my mind. What we said at the time and what I continue to say is, we should use that framework. It should be mandatory for looking at investments under the Future Made in Australia program, and we should be really transparent with those assessments. So we think the framework is an important guardrail, but it needs to be used.
So that national interest framework makes it a bit better, but you still, to use your words there, you still don't think this is the right way to respond to these Trump tariffs.
I mean, I don't think this framework was ever actually about responding to this Trump. It was responding to a broader system of geopolitical challenges. There will be a narrow set of cases where it is appropriate for us to support local industry to do that, but we need to have a rigorous framework applied.
Yeah. So, what is your concern here that it does divert resources from more productive parts of the economy into areas where there are government subsidy dollars on offer, and that's going to distort the economy?
Look, that's the principal concern that you have with these types of policies. I've just come from business lunches where everyone is bemoaning skill shortages and how they're going to get the workforce they need. So, sort of propping up a particular part of the economy doesn't really make sense in that environment. It's putting government money, taxpayers' money on the table. So we always have to be really cautious and make sure we're getting good bang for buck when we're doing that. And more generally, I think the concern is when you put money on the table, businesses are going to be really good at coming back and asking for more. So trying to make sure that you can have off-ramps, turn the tap off when the time is right, has got to be built into the structure of these types of programs.
One of the other things you might have heard from business, whether they're small, medium or large, is energy costs. And this is a really vexed political issue, and we know there are some very different plans on the table at this election, but neither of them really involve prices coming down quickly. But from your perspective, are there things that can be done, levers that can be pulled to make energy, to make power more affordable? Because surely that would have a big impact on productivity in Australia, right?
Look, I think that's right. I think, low energy costs are really critical for underpinning long-term productivity. It is difficult to see in the short term that there is any answer that does that, short of shifting the cost from energy bills to the taxpayer. There's certainly things that governments can encourage people.
Which is what the government's kind of doing with its energy rebates, right?
Indeed, that's right. So they're providing bill relief, but the budget picks up the tab. In the medium term, what is clear is we have an energy system that is in transition. We are going to have to build out a lot more generation capability as coal comes offline. And, it is super important that we get the right market signals to do that. There is a review of the national electricity market underway at the moment, looking at those kind of post-2030 system. It is, I just want to reiterate how important it is that those signals are right, because we need to do this in the lowest cost possible way.
Does nuclear power send the right signal? I'm not sure if you've had a good look at it, but are you persuaded at all that this is the right way for Australia to go?
Look, I'm not kind of inherently against nuclear power. I think we should always be technology agnostic, but I think, as I said, the numbers have to stack up. So I would, you would want the market signals in place that was inducing that investment. I think we'd have to be very careful about government going in and making a major new investment without having tested that market.
Look, you mentioned productivity, the care economy as one area that we could see some improvement. And I know you've spoken about this before. This has been an area of growth over the last few years, the care economy. What can be done to make that more productive?
Look, this has been an area that has been really difficult to shift the dial, and these are labour-intensive sectors by their nature, which does make it harder to get productivity gains. But we think there are opportunities. There's opportunities in new technologies in some spaces, and healthcare is a really great example. Opportunities to use digital technologies, to use AI to manage treatments better is very live. We think there is also some opportunities for new tech in spaces like aged care. ABC had a really excellent story on 7:30 a couple of nights ago about increasing use of robots in aged care to do some of the harder and dirtier tasks. It's not about replacing people, but it's about complementing them and freeing them up to do the more important parts of the role. So there's some opportunities there. Beyond that, it really comes to government policy design, making sure that we have the best signals for rationing those scarce dollars, making sure that we're not overpaying providers, that we have appropriate levels of market competition. They're all really important things in these kind of non-market sectors.
And look, you would have watched the debate around whether the public service should be cut. It's a debate that sort of stemmed from, coming back to Donald Trump, from the approach being taken over there with Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency. We know here Peter Dutton is talking about cutting back on the public service to make some savings. What would that have any negative or positive impact on the economy and on productivity?
Look, I mean, I think it's pretty small in the scheme of things. If you're not talking about, if you're excluding frontline public service and, you know, some of the care sectors we were just talking about from that, and you're just talking about, you know, sort of policy staff, it's pretty tiny in the, I haven't looked at it for a while, but in the percentage of government spending, it's small.
Right.
So, you know, it's often a sideshow, I think, those kind of debates. You know, I'd actually be worried if we were to seriously reduce public service capability, we might reduce the capacity to deliver some of the reforms that I'm talking about. You know, that's not to say that public service should be off limits. We all have to look at ways to improve our productivity and efficiency.
You don't think it's too big at the moment? You don't think the size of the public service is too big?
I mean, as far as I've seen, the numbers, you know, they have grown somewhat in recent times, but some of that is about bringing outsourced labour and labour hire inside the public service. I think as a share of the population, it's actually decreased over 20 years or something to that effect. So, you know, I haven't seen a strong case that it's way out of line. And as I said, I think it's pretty small beer in the scheme of the overall budget and economy.
And then what about this debate around work from home? Because this is something I know you've looked at the Productivity Commission. Is there a sweet spot when it comes to how much work from home is helpful to the economy and how much is not?
Look, there seems to be, and you know, the research is still evolving, but I think what most of the studies that I've seen seem to suggest is that what I'll call well-managed hybrid, so some sort of structure around, you know, you're at home a couple of days a week, you're in the office 3 days a week, and there's you know, everyone sort of doing that at the same time. That seems to have, you know, pretty small impacts on overall productivity, maybe slightly positive impacts on productivity, because it seems as if people are getting the benefits of face-to-face contact in the office, which can be, you know, ideas generation, mentoring the next generation, but they're also getting that flexibility from being able to work from home sometimes, and that yields kind of big benefits in terms of employee satisfaction, in terms of employee retention. So that does seem to be the sweet spot. There's some data that suggests fully remote can be bad for productivity. The other thing that's really important to note, lots of good research suggesting that this has supported women to participate in the workforce. There's some US literature suggesting it's supported greater participation of people with disabilities. So, you know, it also allows us to expand our potential pool of workers, which is a really positive thing for the economy in the longer term.
So that hybrid being, 2 or 3 days in the office, 2 or 3 days at home?
That's right. And we're just talking about those jobs where that's a possibility. There is, you know, lots of parts of the economy where people have to be in the office all the time. But for the kind of white-collar jobs where this can be done, everything I've seen suggests that hybrid seems to be able to work without having a significant impost on productivity.
And can actually help, is your point.
Yeah, that's right, because there's these other benefits in terms of flexibility that don't get captured in the productivity numbers but are very real for the employees.
Look, final one before I let you go, because this week we've seen some shocking claims when it comes to the childcare sector. That Four Corners report on Monday that did raise cases of abuse and neglect in particularly for-profit centres. Look, it has raised questions about the regulation of standards, how they're set and how they're regulated in the childcare sector. And look, this is something that the Productivity Commission did look at. I think it was last year. What was the recommendation there about how this sector should be regulated?
The quality regulation in this sector is critically important, and we saw the reasons for that, and that was extremely shocking viewing. What we recommended is that assessments under the quality framework be done more often. We're in a world where it can be years between centres.
Yeah, I think the story said it can be up to 9 years for some centres in between being checked.
Yeah, that's right, and that is just obviously far too long when you're talking about vulnerable people, i.e. children, in these settings. We need to make sure that there is much more rigorous quality oversight. We also recommended an early learning and care commission. The idea of that was that we have state governments essentially responsible in their jurisdictions for regulation, but no one oversighting the national picture and
that hasn't happened.
Quality
That
as a
hasn't
whole.
happened, has it?
No, it hasn't happened. The government says they're still working through the various recommendations in the report. But we think that could be an important part of the arsenal in trying to oversight and set these quality standards.
Well, we'll see whether there is further movement on this with the focus on the issue right now. Danielle Wood, always great to pick your brains, particularly on the eve of a budget and an election, to get some expertise around where Australia needs to be going. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Thanks for having me, David.
And we'll have much more about this on Sunday morning. We'll be talking to the Shadow Treasurer, Angus Taylor, ahead of Budget Week. So I hope you can join us then. Insiders, 9 a.m. on Sunday on ABC TV.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.